What's up, everybody? I'm back. And by popular demand, no less. Today's video is on Jordan Peterson, a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. He made a name for himself because of his stance against a gender pronoun law that ultimately made it through the Canadian legislature. Jordan is an intelligent and insightful critic of the academic left, and I applaud his willingness to confront the forces of post-modernism and moral relativism, for both of these ideologies are examples of what happens when universities start handing out doctorates to D-League intellectuals. My critique of Peterson actually relates to comments he has made regarding religion, specifically his literary analysis of biblical stories and archetypes, a topic through which he has attracted some of his most enthusiastic supporters. However, I am not a fan of his arguments, and I will go so far as to say that I find them a little silly. The nice thing about highly generalized concepts such as literary archetypes is that they are very easy to connect to whatever you want. The biggest problem with Peterson's analysis is that it is based on a very myopic assertion. However, he never accurately characterizes it as such. What I'm getting at here is this constant focus on the Christian narrative as if it is universally regarded by all humanity as the most important story ever told. To be fair to Peterson, he does mention Christianity in the context of other religions and fables, and admits the ideas within the Judeo-Christian tradition have their roots in older cultures. But he oftentimes appears frustrated, even hurt, when discussing New Atheism's dismissal of Christianity as superstition. There is a point to be made on that front, but Peterson does not seem like the appropriate vessel for it because of how personally he takes the criticism, and how invested he seems to be in the Christian narrative despite appearing like an objective scholar. Additionally, the history of Christianity in Western civilization since the crucifixion stands in stark contrast to the immaculate archetypes Peterson praises so enthusiastically. I can grant all of his claims about the symbolic beauty of Christ's life, but we are still a long way from, therefore, we need to respect all religious stories and never criticize them. Because over 1,000 years of Christendom in Europe, we got the Crusades, serfdom, divine monarchy, also known as theocracy and dictatorship, the systemic murder of scientists, non-believers, and people convicted of imaginary crimes, as well as the general spiritual and psychological suffocation of countless millions due to the absolutely oppressive social regulations of the church. When I look back at the history of Christianity, I see a whole lot of monkeys groping in the darkness, which due to their own emphasis on faith was self-perpetuating. Ironically, humanity never would have reached a point where someone like Jordan could argue this overly intellectual position if it wasn't for the fact that Western thinkers stopped looking to this mythology for truth in the first place, and moved on to the standard of reason and observation. Only with the refusal to lionize these texts have human beings begun to arrive at real knowledge. Peterson's silence on other religions is also problematic. He loves to talk about the significance of Christianity, and it is a clever move because he lives in a predominantly Christian society. So most of his audience accepts his statements about the universality of Christian symbolism without questioning it because it's the only one they really know. But let's look at an equally popular but more problematic archetypal narrative, which he never mentions, namely Islam. In the Islamic archetypal tradition, the hero isn't the truth-teller who sacrifices himself, taking on the burden of chaos for the benefit of the group. Rather, the truth-teller claims that chaos comes from a lack of submission to Allah, and that it is acceptable and sometimes necessary to force the world to submit to his will through violence. Billions of people throughout history have found this archetypal structure regarding the forces of order and chaos incredibly powerful. Where's Islam, swang song, Jordan? Am I not allowed to criticize the dangerous and useless ideas in the Quran because the symbolism of the narrative structure might mean something to someone? Or help Middle Eastern people construct their own civilization? Or because some Mideast psychology professor has a really good class that whitewashes the worst of the history, emphasizing only the good parts in the vaguest way possible? I'm sure you can analyze the Quranic narrative structure and make some interesting observations about human psychology, but should I really be expected to invest some kind of metaphysical significance to them? Shit! Every human society on Earth practiced child sacrifice at some point in their past, and that says a lot about mankind's exteriorization of the dominance hierarchy. But that doesn't mean I have to respect child sacrifice, or placate some religion that still wants to do it. Islam rests neatly in the monotheistic tradition of the Western world. You cannot pretend that the story of mystical archetypes ends with Christ. Muslims sure as hell don't think it does. Peterson's claims also do not adequately take into consideration that there were competing narratives in the ancient world at the time. He speaks about the evolution of Judeo-Christian archetypes as though everyone in the world got together and decided that these were the most representative and, more importantly, meaningful symbols in all mythology, completely leaving out the fact that Judaism was, and still is, dwarfed by nearly every other culture on the planet. Stoicism is one example of a highly rational and disciplined philosophy that predated Christianity by hundreds of years and was contemporaneous with Judaism. Stoics argued that the universe was indifferent to man's suffering, and therefore individuals must use reason to strengthen their minds against the coming struggles of life. There was no personal God, no dogma, no afterlife, no propitiation, but far more importantly, no hell, no judgment, no stonings, no blasphemy, no heresy. Just hard truths. This is by far what irks me most about Peterson's style of apologetics. It completely downplays the history of suffering and oppression brought about by the zealous certainty of these superstitions, just because some ambiguous archetypes make him feel good. Sorry, but I don't buy it. I guess the main problem I have is that Peterson takes the very reasonable observations of Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces and attempts to imbue them with a metaphysical significance which they do not deserve. His analyses are thus redundant and overindulgent. Peterson does what is, in effect, a kind of reverse postmodernist move. Postmodernism claims that any one thing can be interpreted in an infinite number of ways. Each one as legitimate as the last, no matter how nonsensical that interpretation may seem. While Jordan argues that an infinite number of concepts can all be interpreted as stemming from one basic thing, no matter how tenuous the relationship appears to the rational observer. In the end, however, what Christianity did to European society for a millennium is all I need to cite in response to his arguments. As with so many things in life, practice is far more important than principle, and practice is always more important than symbol. The belief that the creator of the universe wrote a really terrible book that people must follow or suffer in eternity in fire has inspired the worst in humanity in ways too numerous to count. And this history cannot be washed away by one professor's attempt to look at it through rose-colored glasses.